This week is the beginning of the craziness of 2025 because this week, not only do we have Mercury moving into Aquarius as well as the new moon in Aquarius, but by the end of the week, we'll have Venus moving into shadow, Venus conjoining Neptune, and Venus conjoining the North Node before next week when Venus moves into Aries. But this Venus North Node, Venus Neptune conjunction is really, really intense, and there's a lot to talk about here. So let's go ahead and get started talking about it. Welcome back to the Astrology Report, this time for January 27th through February 2nd of 2025. If you don't know me already, my name is Cam White, and I like to talk about the transiting astrology and let you guys know how to use it to help, I don't know, make your life better and not make your life worse, if that makes sense. Anyway, I've talked a lot about 2025 being the year of change. And, if you're a member over on my website, I've talked a lot about in the game plans. I do like a monthly game plan video. Like February is really the pivot where we start feeling a little bit less slow, less low energy and start really building back up. And it really kind of kicks off this week. And a lot of this week is like planting seeds that are going to be things that we deal with again around April and even around May. There's really a lot to talk about, so let me jump into it. So we're starting Monday off with the moon in Capricorn still making a sextile to Saturn, and it will be going opposite Mars after that. And our highlight for the day is Mercury is going to be moving into Aquarius. And so there's a lot of like Saturnian energy going on here. The moon's in Capricorn, where if the moon is about our emotions and how we kind of feel day to day, it's technically in detriment in Capricorn, where if the moon's about feeling emotions, Capricorn is about like not really feeling emotions and being more stoic. And so there's this like inability to really feel things out the way that maybe they need to be felt out. However, what the moon in Capricorn is really good for is just like getting things done. This is a dark moon phase. We're getting ready for a new moon. I think Monday's really good to just be like, all right, let's just start the week off. What is the plan? What is the agenda? What are the things that we need to do? And cross off that list. However, and that's a lot of the moon sextiling Saturn as well. But as the moon goes opposite Mars, there is this emotional, again, like we'll have quite a few more of these moon Mars oppositions. We'll have at least one a month. Moon in Capricorn is in detriment. Mars is fallen in Cancer, and they're opposite one another. And there just seems to be like a lot of like emotional like frustration that's hard to confront or that's hard to deal with. And it reminds me a lot of like a child who's very, very upset. And, sometimes you have to, as like a parent or even like a guardian or some sort of an adult figure, you kind of have to like not feed into their emotions and be like, hey, that sucks, kid, but like you kind of have to like, suck it up and deal with it a little bit. And so the moon going opposite Mars is this kind of frustration too, I think, with resources and energy and what's the right thing to do, what's the wrong thing to do. And that might be a little bit difficult. But again, what's nice about these harder lunar transits is they only last so long. Like, it'll be a little bit frustrating and then things will get better as time moves on. Now, we do have Mercury moving into Aquarius, and there's really a lot to talk about here. So Mercury likes being in air signs. It has triplicity. It has triplicity, rulership of the air signs, which essentially means Mercury does well in air signs. Mercury in Aquarius, though, Aquarius is like a fixed mindset. It is a fixed sign. It's like the dead of winter. And a lot of the Aquarius stuff is like, we have these like fixed ideas of like how society is supposed to be, how people are supposed to work, how people are supposed to function. I've looked at Aquarius so much as like, there's 10 million labels for anyone and everyone nowadays. And that's just such an Aquarius thing, right? Like how many ways can we chop up society and people and give them these, and group them into things, right? Now, as Mercury's in Aquarius, there's a part of this that's like, hey, the Mercury stuff is the way that we communicate, the way that we're thinking, the way that we're, expressing ideas has a lot more dignity at this point, meaning it is functioning a lot better. It has access to some resources and some tools to do that job, but it's through the frame of Aquarius where it's fixed, where it's stubborn, where it's rigid, if that makes sense. It's one of those things where try changing someone's opinion on anything, especially in Aquarius. They're going to just like look at you with the Mark Zuckerberg stare and be like, why are you trying to change my opinion? I'm correct. That's kind of like the attitude around it. And so as Mercury's in Aquarius, what this is really good for is like not being changeable, because oftentimes we can be a little bit too malleable, a little bit too changeable, and a little bit all over the place. And it's good to just be like, hey, no, this is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm believing. However, it can also be bad when we get stuck in this way of doing things. And the note that I wrote down is mental gymnastics. Mercury in Aquarius is all about mental gymnastics. I think a lot of the Aquarius stuff is very mental gymnastics a lot of the time. And I've talked about this over the past few years, like in 2020 and 2021, there was a lot of mental gymnastics over how things were supposed to function. I just thought it was a really good example. But as Mercury goes into Aquarius, mental gymnastics can be very good in terms of like, hey, What are you trying to do? What do you want to change in your life? What do you want things to be better? And hey, whatever is going to get you to do that, right? Like sometimes we have to make up our own mental gymnastics in order to get to a conclusion. And sometimes we make things harder for ourselves, but that's the way that we have to do it in order to do it. And then other times we have these mental gymnastics that make things way harder for ourselves that we don't actually need to, and it actually gets in our way. So your job, because this isn't my responsibility, but your job is to figure out which side of the spectrum are you on here? Is this going to be better? Is this going to be worse? Are you going to be like in a fixed mindset and that's going to be helpful for you? Or are you going to be in a fixed mindset that's kind of like causing you to not actually have a little bit more of an open mind and to actually, get out of your own way? Then we get to Tuesday, and on Tuesday we have the moon in Capricorn. It's going to make a trine to Uranus, and then it's going to make a sextile to Venus super, super early in the morning, like probably before you wake up, which is fine. It's just one of those things of like, that's going to be not something that you really feel throughout the day. But we also have Venus entering shadow as our first highlight of the week, or I shouldn't say first highlight of the week, but our highlight on Tuesday. And then the moon will go into Aquarius and it will conjoin Mercury and Pluto. So like the moon in Capricorn, trining Uranus, sextiling Venus, like if you're an early riser, great, that's fine. If not, like it's not that big of a deal, but I want to talk a lot about Venus entering shadow. So look, I hate how much I have to hype up this spring, simply because something I cringe at is when astrologers, like, it's like a regular, like if you're on Instagram, like there'll be like a Mercury retrograde and astrologer like, oh my God, this Mercury retrograde is going to change everyone's lives. And it's just like, you would think the world, you'd think that's the second coming of Christ with some of these fucking transits. And so it's very frustrating when it reminds me of like when the boy cried wolf, right? Like there's so many of these hyped transits. There's so many of these hyped things in astrology that like when something hyped does happen, it doesn't feel as important. And with Venus entering shadow here at the very end of January, we're starting to have seeds being planted that you may not even know are being planted, that you're going to come back around to around the middle of April. I think it's the middle of April when Venus stations direct. Venus will station direct literally like on Saturn, pretty much on the North Node too. And what's really important about this Tuesday time is while this is the day Venus will enter shadow, let's just say this whole week is really the time to pay attention to it. And Venus retrogrades are like reevaluations of things. But this is Venus like super exalted. Like things are like both really good, but you could feel a sense of change happening at the same time. That's the hard part about all of this is like things are good, things are enjoyable, but what's about to go down? What's about to change? What's about to be different? We can all kind of feel that too. That's what's really interesting. So Venus enters shadow. The way the note I wrote down was like eyeballs emoji, like the ones that look to the side. That's how I look at this. And I don't want to be like, this is what's going to happen this day. This would be like if you are a person that like writes in a journal or has like a diary, I would really make sure you remember this day, because I do think there's going to be stuff about this day that we'll come back to, whether that's in the news, whether that's again in your own personal life, we'll see. But then the moon goes into Aquarius and it conjoins Mercury and Pluto. The other part about this too is with all the stuff in Aquarius, like you could tell things are getting tribal again with the whole, like, ever since I feel like the inauguration, people who weren't criticizing policy 5 seconds ago are all of a sudden criticizing policy, and everything just feels very tribal again. And as the moon goes into Aquarius, it's definitely like a little bit of like, all right, what side are you on? What tribe is your tribe, and who are you, and stuff like that, and getting in like, it just reminds me of tribal politics. The other way I'd look at it though is that this is the dark moon. The moon's conjoining Mercury, it's conjoining Pluto, probably being a little bit overwhelmed. I'm seeing people that are probably better off not being online and not reading the news, being online and reading the news and freaking out. However, it's the new moon. Like, I think a lot of this too is the sun is in detriment here. There is this like lack of willpower. There is this lack of vitality, this lack of like independence and confidence. Again, it's kind of like, hey, let's move towards the tribe. Let's move towards the group thought. And that could be good. That could be bad. I think though, the way to really go about this is like, hey, this is another new moon opportunity. This is what I love about astrology, or at least the cycle of the moon and the sun, is like every 30 days, we have an opportunity to kind of like start fresh. And this is another opportunity to start fresh. What I think is more important though, is Venus entering shadow the same time that this new moon happens, which is kind of like, I look at that as two tickers of, there being like some change going on, like, all right, new moon, and then like, or at least some seeds being planted. So I think on Tuesday, there's a lot of low energy, but there's stuff that's coming up here that's going to be very important later on over the next few months. Now we get to Wednesday, and our first highlight of the day is Mercury's conjoining Pluto, and then we actually get to the new moon in Aquarius, and then the moon will be trining Jupiter after that new moon. So the one thing I wanted to talk about with Mercury conjoining Pluto, which does also happen pretty early on in the morning, was last year in 2024 when Mercury conjoined Pluto was when Tucker Carlson interviewed Vladimir Putin. You know, a lot of people hate Tucker Carlson. That's fine. But so like a lot of you just maybe not care about that, but it was such a good example of like Mercury conjoining Pluto. Like here's literally like a journalist, and people are like, oh my God, he's not a journalist. It doesn't matter. Like a journalist, someone interviewing someone, holding up a microphone to something like Pluto. Now I like to interpret that more so as like, hey, putting a voice to power. Putin is one of the most powerful people in the world right now. And we got some insight into whether that was his own propaganda or his own line of thinking. How much of that is honest? How much of this is propaganda? That's for you to decide, in my opinion. But it was such a good example of like, wow, Mercury conjoining Pluto. Like, here's a microphone. Here's some information about this area. And so on Wednesday, when Mercury conjoins Pluto, there is something about like, I wonder what sort of messages we will be receiving. And I remember it was like Tucker Carlson was like 2 days before that. He's like, I'm in Russia. I'm going to go interview Vladimir Putin. And then it came out on the Mercury Pluto conjunction. It was so like abrupt and random. I don't know if it'll be this abrupt or random this time, but there is something about like information coming out about power, or a microphone or some insight being held up to things like power, things like corruption, things like, and again, this is also Pluto and Aquarius stuff. The hard part about Pluto and Aquarius is really talking about it in this day and age where, again, everything's super tribal and it's, you know, everyone is against one another in every sort of aspect. And again, it's also like there's so many different labels for so many different people, and that's where I think, in my opinion, the power lies. And it's kind of like, again, what's that stupid saying? Divide and conquer. This is like very Pluto and Aquarius. Just divide, and conquer. Now, the new moon in Aquarius happens also on Wednesday, so it is kind of low energy. I would look at this week though as, again, something is changing, something is starting over, something is starting new, and you're going to see that continue by the end of this week when we start talking about the Venus stuff. So that's really why I'm kind of like, hey, this is all important stuff, or at least this is like the context is like, hey, we're starting a new chapter. We maybe didn't close the last chapter that like specifically, it just kind of ended, but now we're in a new chapter, whether you think so or not. But then the moon, after the new moon, starts making this trine to Jupiter, which is nice. I like the moon trining Jupiter, but it's still Jupiter in detriment. So there is this kind of like moon in Aquarius, mental gymnastic stuff, trining Jupiter in Gemini. It just reminds me of trying to rationalize things, trying to maybe take on too much. Like, it reminds me of like theoretically doing things. Like moon in Aquarius, trining Jupiter in Gemini. It's like, well, theoretically, it should be able to do this. Theoretically, AI could take over the world, but in my opinion, a lot of the ChatGPT AI stuff is really overhyped and it's really dumb. And a lot of you, I can't believe, by the way, the amount of people I've seen that straight up talk to ChatGPT like they don't, like they're in prison and they're not allowed to talk to another human being is mind-blowing. By the way, too, on some real shit, if you're a creator, if you are any sort of a person that has to use some creative thought in your work, what you'll see nowadays is everyone saying, oh, use ChatGPT to unlock your creativity. This is the issue with all of this Aquarius stuff. If you've ever seen the Fairly Odd Parents episode where everyone's gray, that's what Pluto and Aquarius is everyone's supposed to be a gray blob. Don't use your brain, use ChatGPT, a more retarded version of the human brain. Not even a human brain. It's like literally just like a large language model. It's not even a fucking conscious being. Like, human brains have made every fucking thing that you can imagine on this earth today. It wasn't made by a robot. And just the idea that people are saying, oh, use ChatGPT to be creative is literally like the worst fucking advice. I'd be like, hey, cut off your legs if you want to be a runner. That's essentially what people are saying. And so if you're one of those people that are using ChatGPT for creative stuff, you are going to dumb yourself down and you are not going to have any creative ideas. And where you're going to see is, again, supply and demand. The demand for actual creative thoughts and independent ideas coming from a human soul, a human brain, will actually be important. So stop using ChatGPT for shit. It's literally like the worst advice I've ever used. It's a gimmick. So then we get to Thursday. On Thursday, the moon, while it's in Aquarius, is going to make a square to Uranus. The moon then ingresses Pisces, and we get our highlight for the day, which is the sun making a trine to Jupiter. Okay, moon squaring Uranus, disruption. Reminds me of like social disorder. Moon in Aquarius squaring Uranus and Taurus. But then the moon goes into Pisces, and there's like a softer energy about the day. But the thing to talk about with the moon in Pisces is now the moon's in Pisces, literally 2 days before all of this stuff in Pisces happens. And what I've learned with this stuff is like sometimes a transit in the astrology will happen, but the moon needs to make its way over to that area of the zodiac in order to kind of like activate it, right? So the fact that Venus will conjoin Neptune in the North Node, and then the moon is going to conjoin Neptune, Venus in the North Node, all here on Saturday, is really, really important that the moon's going to be there. And that starts here on Thursday. So Thursday is, I think, when things get interesting. Now, what does that mean? Live your life, take opportunities. If people hit you up, or if things just kind of come out of the blue, listen to it, pay attention to it. Don't like cut everything off, because I just think this is a really important time. But we do have the sun making a trine to Jupiter. And if you know a little thing or two about astrology, the sun, when it trines Jupiter or Saturn, is like a symbolic marker of when Jupiter or Saturn will be stationing direct or retrograde. Jupiter is retrograde. It will be stationing direct here really, really soon, which is extremely good news. But the sun trining Jupiter too just reminds me of like, it's the sun in detriment and Jupiter in detriment, but they're trining one another. It's, what's that? Misery loves company, I feel like is kind of the idea. And the sun in Aquarius trining Jupiter and Gemini reminds me of like people who are like hyping each other up off stuff that they shouldn't be hyped about, if that makes sense. Like you'll see that in the like in comments on like social media where people are just, you're just like, everyone's lying to each other, but hey, whatever, as long as you guys are more positive. The sun shining Jupiter, I think, is also seeing the bigger picture, feeling more optimistic. But I think in order to see the optimism, you might have to do a little mental gymnastics. You might have to go like, well, if I blah, 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 blah. And whatever's going to make you more positive is what's actually really important, in my opinion, because this is a really low energy time, in my opinion. It's easier to feel like, I was talking to a buddy of mine and just like, so many people just feel so low and like feel so defeated, especially just the people that aren't into astrology. And it's like, look, this is going to last one more month. Then everything starts really building up really, really fast between March, April, May. June is great. July is great. August kind of sucks. Well, I shouldn't say kind of sucks. There's a lot of good things in August, and there's like one fucking super bad thing in August, and that's that. The sun shines Jupiter. I think we feel a little bit of hope. We get to Friday though, and the moon will make a square to Jupiter, and it will conjoin Saturn while it's in Pisces. This is kind of, again, confusion and overwhelm. If the moon is about how we feel, and it's in Pisces, it's very yin, it's very internal, it's very like, what do we believe? It like squares Jupiter and Gemini, where like what our intuition says may not necessarily make sense to like what the world tells you. Like, again, this is why I'm such a big like proponent of like the Mercury Jupiter stuff. Like if you took my how to unlock your goals with the planets webinar, I really hounded on this idea of Mercury rules logic and rationale, and Jupiter rules abundance. And like abundance is opposed to logic, and logic is like opposed to abundance. This is something like I've talked so much about because it's been genuinely life-changing for me. And you might feel as if something is true, but the world might tell you it's not. Like, for example, the world might tell you, oh, you can only get so far in life. You can only have these things in your life. But your intuition, or even your own experience or your own observation of the world, might tell you differently, that like, well, these other people have these experiences. Why can't I? And so the moon making that square to Jupiter, I think, is just kind of like the wires are crossed, or there's like energy that's not working, but it's hard to like describe or hard to like pinpoint what it is. And then the moon conjoins Saturn, where I think like, hey, if you choose to believe in a world where the things that you want and the lifestyle that you want and the things that you want to experience are possible for you, then let's look on the internal and let's ask, okay, who do you have to become? What do you have to take? What do you have to change in order to get there? That's how I really look at Friday. And that's important because like, I feel like Friday sets this weird tone for Saturday. Now we get to Saturday. This is when things are getting crazy. I really hounded on this on my February game plan over on my memberships. If you don't know what the game plan is, it's like a monthly horoscope, but I'm like actually like trying to prep you guys for something rather than just like, oh, here's the transit. It doesn't mean anything, or it's not significant. It's like, I'm trying to fucking help you guys use this shit. So Venus, who is about pleasure, connection, fun, relationships, she is in her exalted sign. She conjoins Neptune on Saturday. Then 5 seconds later, she conjoins the North Node. The North Node turns things up to an extreme. Neptune creates like rose-colored glasses, idealism, things like that. And then the moon joins the chat and conjoins Neptune and Venus And well, the moon will actually trine Mars, then conjoin Neptune, then conjoin Venus, and then conjoin the North Node before the moon enters Aries. Saturday is crazy. And we start the month off with this transit. What I talked about in the game plan that like I've really been sitting with myself is imagine you can live in a world where whatever you want in your life, you can get. You just have to ask for it. What people often do is they might feel something. They might say like, oh, I want something to themselves, but they then rationalize. They do this thing where they go, well, that's not possible. I can't have that. I'm not worthy of that. I don't deserve that, whatever it is. And so then they ask for something that they don't actually want, but they rationalize is actually possible for them. And then when they get that thing, they get upset and resent it because it's actually not what they wanted. And Venus conjoining conjoining Neptune, Venus conjoining the North Node, and all this, and all of these transits that we have with this Venus stuff coming up is like, I want to ask you, what do you actually want? What does your heart of hearts genuinely want? And rather than rationalizing it, like be completely 1000% honest. Be honest. Don't hide it. Don't lie to yourself. Don't lie to other people. Be honest. Even if it's crazy, even if it's so far-fetched, even if no one in the world has ever had it before, be honest with what it is that you want. Venus, because here's the deal. A lot of these next few months is like, you're pretty much going to get what you ask for. But the issue is, are you going to ask for the things that you want, or are you going to ask for things that you just think you can get? Does that make sense? And so Venus conjoining Neptune, number one, the other way I'd really look at this is like this Saturday is really kind of like one of the most important days of the year. There is a little bit of overstimulation. There is a little bit of like overwhelm and it's almost anxiety inducing because it's just like, it reminds me of like something that's really sweet. You ever something like I have a sweet tooth, and back when I was like younger, I used to just love extreme sweet stuff. Now I guess as I get older, I'm like, things do get a little bit too sweet for me. Things are really, really sweet. And that might be a little overwhelming at this point. Venus conjoining Neptune is like things feeling too good to be true. Things like being very distorted. It almost reminds me is like, have you ever been so down bad for someone, like let's say like a crush on someone, where you just like completely ignore anything and everything possibly that's a red flag, because like when you have rose colored glasses, every flag is red, so it doesn't really matter. That's kind of like the vibe here. And it's not necessarily like, oh, there's all these red flags that you're ignoring. It's more so of like you're that, like, again, that's how optimistic, that's how like idealistic that you're seeing everything in. Now, Venus conjoins the North Node too, which is like taking on more. It's like the sugary sweetness that you get. You're like, this is so sugary and so sweet. I'm going to have even more. I'm going to go even more. And so there is a part of this that's like, hey, for a lot of us, you know, if you're an addict or something like that, and you just fucking, you know, once like the beers start, we start getting those beers going. And then before you know it, it's 2 days later. But if for some people, this might be about knowing when to stop. But I think for like on a different level, I would argue, rather than trying to fulfill yourself in pleasures that kind of like cheap nutrition, like this would be like spiritually nutritious. Like, what do you actually want? Like, for example, like, do you actually want to get high, or do you actually want love, and you want purpose, and you want fulfillment? Does that make sense? So like, rather than saying like, oh, I want these things, you want something else. As the moon conjoins Venus and conjoins Neptune, I think again, number one, this is planting a lot of seeds, because now Venus is in shadow. This is an event is going to happen. By the way, go out on Saturday night. Holy shit. This is like a fun Saturday night. This is like everyone's drink is being spiked with fun. Watch out for your drink. But I would also say there's a lot of fun energy here. And by the time we get to later on Saturday, the moon ingresses into Aries, where this is like supercharged. Like, this is feeling extremely energized immediately after this. The moon going into Aries, the moon is now waxing. It is now building up. It is now gaining in light. It's going into supercharged Aries, where yes, it will square Mars and all that stuff. But like, there's like this sense of, it reminds me of like, have you ever had like a good nap, or like something that I've done before that I just saw someone else talk about on Instagram, was like a caffeine nap, where like you drink coffee and then you take a nap and then you wake up, you're like super energized. That's almost what this reminds me of. I want you to really pay attention to Saturday. I want you to have as much fun as possible. And I want you to like really look at like, what do you desire and what do you want, and what are you doing to go towards that? And actually being specific and being honest with yourself about what it is that you want, rather than lying to yourself and like putting a cap on it. Like, be 100% honest. What is it that you want to go? What is it that you want to pursue towards? We're living in a world where everything is changing rapidly fast. We're living in a world where the old, again, with the Jupiter Saturn conjunction, the triplicity shift, like the old world that most of us grew up in thinking that the world was going to work, that all went away in 2020. We're living in a new reality in which things can be different and things can change. And I think a lot of this year is like seeing how obvious it is, if that makes sense. And then we get to Sunday, and on Sunday, the moon will still be in Aries. It's going to make a sextile to Mercury and Jupiter. I just think this is like having the emotional motivation that helps with cleverness in terms of fixing things and having solutions and being optimistic. Like there's something about Sunday that's just like feeling pretty good. The moon's in Aries where we're emotionally charged up, and yeah, Mars is still in Cancer. So there's this weird mutual reception that's kind of like motivating and not motivating at the same time. But the moon is sextiling Mercury and Jupiter, where it's kind of like, at least here, there is some sort of like inspirational, like not really feeling the Mars and Cancer vibe. When we get to next week, Mercury's going to trine Jupiter. Venus enters Aries. Whoa. The North Node conjoins Neptune, which is just like, oh man, the propaganda machine will be very interesting to see what it ends up spitting out. Jupiter stations direct next week. And I feel like the Jupiter station direct moment is really where now, like by this point, Mars is really slowing down. It's getting ready to move. Yeah, sure, Venus is going to go retrograde, but I've said this before. I don't really look at the next Mercury and Venus retrogrades as like slowdowns, but more so of like changing things up, introductions, bringing new in rather than like a slowdown of change. But Jupiter stationing direct is now, I think, going to be a very positive aspect in things of moving forward, the bigger stuff moving forward. Venus sextiles Pluto. Mars will trine Saturn as it's still retrograde, and we have a Mercury cazimi next week. The old slow stuff, like January is really slow, and that really ends this week. It's like Venus enters shadow, all of this Venus, North Node, Neptune stuff, which is really setting the precedent for like what we're going to be dealing with in April. All of that changes this week. And then next week, it's like another one thing after another. So with that being said, I'm going to leave you guys off with that. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. Make sure you like and subscribe, and I'll be seeing you guys next time.